he goes, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. Ready for what? He goes, "Are you ready to die?" And right then the airplane stalled. Michael would save his chocolate bunny, break it into chunks, and sell it to me. So in the beginning, when you're young, you got nothing to lose. So go for it, right?
Yeah.
Be smart, but go for it. Worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to fail. And then, well, you're no worse off than you were before you tried. You can't trust anybody 100%. Anybody. Him or me or anybody working for you, can't trust them 100%.
Welcome to the McCullough podcast. I'm Mitchell, and today I have a guest with me who I've known my entire life, and I'd really like to sit down and hear the story because I think he has a pretty cool story. My dad, he's a pilot, an entrepreneur, a business owner who started Horizon Air and built it from the ground up. What?
Horizon Unlimited Air.
Horizon Unlimited Air.
Yeah.
Built it from the ground up, then went to acquire my great granddad's company, Aero Air, and then building a full family legacy. Today, I want to do something different. I don't just want a highlight reel. I want your moments of doubt. I want the decisions that kept you up at night. I want the lessons that cost you something to learn, because there is a version of this wisdom which you have, which is very unique and that can only be told from your perspective. So this is, I think, a pretty cool opportunity, and I'm glad I finally got you to sit down and talk, because on the train ride over, you said this, that you don't like putting yourself out there that much.
I don't seek publicity or notoriety.
Right. So you ready to get started?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Anything you want to say before we
Excited to be here with you, my son, and I think this will be fun to have later on.
Cool. All right. So, first question, before Horizons Unlimited and before Aero Air, take me all the way back. Okay? What did life look like for you growing up? And what were kind of the inspirations that led to you becoming who you are today? Do you have any founding memories
growing up?
Of growing up, yeah.
Well, I mean, just to give a little background, I mean, I grew up in, I think, just a wonderful family. You know, I had a twin brother and two younger brothers, and a wonderful mother and father, Hank and Dana. And we grew up out in the country on a farm. We grew up on farmland. We weren't farmers. My dad was the vice president of John Deere Heavy Equipment Company that sold industrial equipment, primarily road construction and forestry products, John Deere tractors. And my mom originally was a professor in college for speech and
debate teacher.
Yeah, and so she taught us how to argue early on.
Yeah, the fallacies and logic and all that
things.
stuff.
Yeah,
very strong-willed.
Very strong-willed woman and mom, but equally just great.
Yeah.
And so, as you know, I'm reminded that I'm not the oldest in the family because my brother and I were the first, but he was born first, and
right. And he kind of had the business mind first, didn't he?
A little bit. I'll share that story, but the big argument was, well, he was the firstborn, I was the secondborn, by a matter of minutes. I have come up with a theory that I would like some researcher to prove sometime, but I believe it to be true, which is...
You'd like to put this on the record?
If you're a twin, and you're a fraternal twin, which means there's two eggs, not a split egg, then I believe that the first egg to get fertilized flows to the top of the uterus, and the second egg to get fertilized flows to the bottom of the uterus, and therefore born first. So really, the first conceived is born second. And I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. I have lots of doctor friends, and I have, over cocktails, have posed this theory, which has gotten a lot of laughs. But no one's biting yet.
Yeah,
But
you
know,
stand by it.
I stand by it. I think I'm right.
Point of pride for you.
So I'm really the oldest.
Okay.
And yeah, my twin brother, I think the story you're referring to is, we grew up as young people with no sugar in the house. And so, I mean, literally my mom cooked with honey. We had no sugar cereal. There was just no sugar. My mom thought sugar was bad. And so anytime you did get it, so when were the opportunities to get, sugar? Well, it was for the most part Halloween and Easter, maybe a little bit on Christmas, but my mom was big on Easter baskets. So Easter egg hunts and huge Easter baskets with lots of candy in it. So I would promptly, eat down my chocolate bunnies. And these weren't the chocolate bunnies that were hollow in the middle. My mom would get solid chocolate
chunks
bunnies. And I'd pretty much eat all my candy in about 2 days. And Michael would save his chocolate bunny, break it into chunks, and sell it to me over the course of the next week or two. And so
pretty smart.
it was pretty smart. He had a good business mind. I was a consumer and he was a products provider. Yeah.
And then what was the very first business that you ever started up as a kid?
So the very first business was called M&P Ash Cleaning. And my best friend, Mark Peterson, spelled with the C, by the way. Very important to Mark that you get that right.
Okay.
He was my best friend, and we
great.
were always, together getting in trouble and riding motorcycles and doing a lot of things. But, just briefly to kind of go back to, businesses. When I was in sixth grade, finished my sixth grade in the summer, my mom, at the very beginning of summer, she asked me if I wanted new school clothes for seventh grade. And, that was a big deal. New clothes. By the way, bell bottoms were popular back then, halter tops for girls. And of course I wanted new clothes. And she goes, well, you better get a job this summer because you got to buy all your school clothes. I'll provide socks and shoes and other things, but you got to provide your pants and your
if you want those bell bottoms
and your shirts,
you got to earn them.
So I went out and got a job building. We picked strawberries. I built cement stepping stones. I rebuilt pallets, and was always looking for a way to make some money. And then and that really kind of introduced me to economics, if you will. And I was it excited me a lot. I would actually, when I get paid, I would iron my money.
Yeah, that's right.
And to make it crisp, then I would stack it. And I had a little metal, cheap little safe, and I would stack my money in that safe and save up the money. So,
how old were you when this was going on? Was this?
Well, that started in sixth grade. So,
sixth grade.
Or
so this
basically seventh grade.
This is well
middle
after
school.
you stopped giving Michael your candy money.
I probably always bought. At that point I had money, and I think I didn't let him take advantage of me on the market pricing, and I enjoyed chocolate, so I probably still bought it from him. But I probably had more money than he did, because I was a little more aggressive on making it. So anyway, that I digress a little bit. But what was the original question?
The M&P.
Oh, the M&P ash
Yeah.
cleaning. So I think we were in 8th or 9th grade, and Mount St. Helens, so this would have been around 1980, 1979. Anyway, when Mount St. Helens blew up.
So you're still in middle school?
I think so. I graduated high school in 1984, so I
Right.
would have been in
Freshman, middle school.
Middle school. And anyway, the mountain blew up, and all that ash was deposited primarily to the south, which covered Portland and Hillsborough and Beaverton, and even it went all over the world, frankly. But uniquely, Portland had, I'd say, a quarter inch, probably minimum, of ash over all of it, and cars, houses, any surface basically. And so there was this big need for people to get the ash off the roofs of the houses.
Right.
So Mark and I got the idea that we would start this company, M&P Ash Cleaning, and go make some money. So we talked our parents into it. We bought the equipment, which consisted of buckets and hoses and trowels.
You
And,
talked to parents, like what?
Oh yeah,
what
we
did
talked
that
to
entail?
both parents. Both our parents were very encouraging of any positive idea we had relative to that. And back then, liability and thinking about insurance, and that really didn't exist.
Right.
People didn't sue each other for getting hurt on a house.
Yeah, if you fell off a roof or something.
People didn't really worry about us damaging their house. They already had a bunch of ash on it. They just wanted the ash off. And then the city was, you had to get the ash off the house and the roof and the gutters, and then you had to get it to the road, and then you would pile up the ash on the road, and then the city would come pick up that ash. So our job wasn't to dispose it, ours was to get it to the road. And so we were very, very, very busy. We basically had an unlimited market, short.
So it was a very successful
market.
business.
Very, very successful for our first outing. It lasted probably, seems like the whole summer, but it probably was a month and a half, where
Right.
the demand was still there.
But that's pretty good. Like first, all right, like let's build this business, and oh my God, it's already,
yeah,
supply
and
demand
we didn't
kind
think
of
in the term of we thought in terms of business, we really thought in terms of making money. How can we go make some money, and how can we make more than what we've currently been doing? And so we thought it was a good opportunity, and it was, and we got more business than we needed. Obviously, funny story. My twin Michael came into the business to help us. And I think he would claim he was one of the founders of it too. Since there was only three of us, maybe he was too, but it was Mark and I's brainchild.
Right.
And, but I think it was the second house we were doing. He fell off the roof.
Oh.
And into a sub basement, and
I don't remember this part.
Had to get taken to the hospital. He wasn't, mortally wounded or anything, but he did get hurt. Put it that way. He didn't clean any more roofs after that day.
He was he was behind the scenes.
Yeah, but he was there. He was there. But anyway, so we made good money, and that was the first business, M&P ash cleaning.
When did aviation enter the picture for you?
So I grew up in an aviation family, and my dad was a pilot, my mom was a pilot, my uncle was a pilot, my grandfather was a pilot, and he owned a company, and which ultimately I ended up purchasing with my partner many, many, many years later. But the point was, I grew up around airplanes. I was exposed to it early,
right.
and there was a lot of opportunities. And when I was 15, almost 16, I think my birthday's in March. I believe this was in December. My grandfather, Swede Ralston, came over. He'd come over a lot, sit by the fire, and talk to the family and that type of thing. And he came over. I think it was in a morning. He's sitting by the fire, and we're all talking to him. And he looks at me and my brother Michael and says, "Hey, do you guys want to learn how to fly?" "Yeah, I want to learn how to fly." He goes, "Okay, be at the airport at 5 a.m. tomorrow, and we'll start your lessons." And so, obviously very excited, and was there at 5 a.m. the next morning. And he started in, teaching us, all the basics about the airplanes and that type of thing. It was a Darter Commander that we
Darter, not a Turbo Commander. Is it like the same thing? Though?
No, a Darter Commander is like a 150 or a 172 Cessna, but it was made by Commander. So a high wing, single engine.
Oh, single engine.
4-seat airplane. Yeah, no one starts out learning to fly in a jet or a turboprop. Tyler, yeah, that's a whole nother story.
Okay, continue.
But anyway, but the big deal was, my brother and I were doing it together, and there was an airstrip about 12 miles in the Coast Range called the Flying M Ranch. And it was a little 1,800-foot strip, gravel, and it was a one-way strip. So what that means is once you commit to a landing, you have to land because you can't outclimb the canyon on the other side. But it had a lodge there where you could get really great breakfast. And my grandfather really loved it there. And frankly, extremely unique to to start your training flying in and out of a place like that because it's not forgiving, and it teaches you a lot of stick and rudder skills very, very, very quickly. So for the next 3 months, basically, the plan was for us to solo on our 16th birthday, and my birthday's in March. So again, this is December, January. And so we show up at the airport, we pre-flight the airplane. He'd go over, some aerodynamics and theory and all those type of things. And then we would taxi out and take off. We do flying drills on the way over. And then we'd land at the Flying M Ranch and get breakfast, talk about the flight and all the different things. And then either myself or my brother would get in the airplane from the Flying M and then fly back.
Right.
We also trained at the Hillsborough Airport and did multiple landings and, all those type of things. But basically what Swede told me was, he goes, when you can fly me in and out of the Flying M Ranch and not scare me, I'm going to solo you. That was kind of the benchmark. And so that's exactly what I did.
That was your intro. Kind of took off from there, though, didn't it?
Well, I mean, certainly, but the question was, when did I really get interested in airplanes? And I would say it was that experience that got me jazzed up, and it's probably where I decided, this is what I want to do for, in my life. I wanted to be a pilot,
right?
And ultimately, I wanted to be an airline pilot, and so that's where I got really interested. Just a quick funny story during that time.
Okay.
That I've shared with others that, give you a perspective of your great grandpa. And so we're taking off out of Hillsborough. It's probably the third time I have ever done a takeoff. And Swede, grandpa, would sit on his hands, literally sit on his hands. So you knew that you were doing everything. So anything good or bad happening in the airplane was your fault, right?
Right.
And anyway, I'm taking off out of Hillsborough. And I'm climbing out, and it's very important to maintain, what's called VX or VY, best climb speed, either rate or angle. And what you don't want to do is let the airplane get too slow, because you can get very close to a stall. And if you stall the airplane low to the ground, that's really bad. And so anyway, I'm climbing out. I'm happy. Everything's smooth. It's going great. I'm climbing. I'm probably, 400 or 500 feet off the ground. And he looks over at me. He's still sitting on his hands, and he goes, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. Ready for what? He goes, "Are you ready to die?" And right then the airplane stalled. And
is it blaring at you, chiming?
Oh, it gives you, in that airplane, it has this little stall horn.
Yeah.
But basically when you got the stall horn, very soon after that, you're going to stall. And, but right when he was saying that, it wasn't a second later, the airplane stalled. And it was a really good trainer, but it, dropped a wing. And anyway, he recovered. I didn't recover. And then he looks at me and he goes, "Okay, first lesson." He goes, "You got to pay very close attention to your airspeed, because you don't want to stall the airplane on departure." And, but what was great about him as an instructor is he would let you make mistakes.
Right. You had to make the mistake.
You had to make the mistake.
Correct.
And then he would correct it. And then obviously it was a more impactful lesson that way than just the theory of stall.
Right. Never forgot it.
Never forgot it. And I think it's a great story.
All right. You mentioned that your idea was to become an airline pilot because you're inspired. So what did you go from, all right, I want to fly airplanes, airline pilot sounds pretty good. What is that? Now you're a business owner.
Well,
So
I think, in high school, people start thinking about, college. They start thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? Hopefully, and once I found, up to that point in time, I was a good student. I was a 3.5 student. Michael, my twin, was a 4-point student. Very competitive person. I was a big athlete. I ran track, and I played football, and I was ski raced. I was an 11-time letterman, through high school. So it was a big part of my life. And but the minute that I figured out that aviation is where I wanted to go, I had to start making some decisions because there's only so much time in a day.
Right.
And
Everyone's got 24 hours in a day.
exactly. So after I soloed on my 16th birthday, I got my private pilot on my 17th birthday, and then, but 17 on, I really dedicated myself to flying to the point where I didn't play football my senior year.
Right.
That was a huge disappointment to the coach, who was also my math teacher. No, I don't know, physics teacher maybe. Anyway, he
What were you doing flying? You were just like getting your ratings, or you were flying for business?
No, I was getting my ratings. I'm still in high school, and it, you had to get a certain number of hours. You had to do a lot of studying. You had to pass a lot of different tests, and I needed to get into college, get into the right college, and I wanted to go to the University of Washington, and football took a lot of time and obviously in dedication, and I just didn't have enough time to play football and get all these other things done. Track, it was different, and ski racing was different as far as the time commitment, but football was a 24-hour job, even in high school. And so I quit playing football. And it was a big deal to me. It was also a big deal to the school. Most of a lot of my friends were football players. I got blackballed, for letting the team down. And, it was my first, I'll call it, the first time in my life where socially, I was just a nice person. I liked everybody.
Class president.
And people liked me. I was student body president.
Oh, student body president.
So at the end of the day, to get, to literally get blackballed by a big group of your friends, who at least people you thought were friends, was it was a new experience. And I understood it, but, they took it pretty far to the point where they're not even talking to me, right, at least for the football season, but including the coach. And so
who was in your corner during that time? Like, who was supporting you? Or was it just you?
It was, certainly my brother and my family, my best friend, Mark Peterson, M&P Ash Cleaning, he got it. And anybody that really knew me and knew what I wanted to do and why, understood it. And, but it doesn't mean it didn't, affect others in a different way.
Right.
But the point of mentioning that is to say that, once you figure out what it is that you want to do, you got to go for it, and you can't let others distract you in a negative way to achieve, as long as it's a good goal and what you're trying to make happen.
Right.
So anyway, over the course of my senior year, I literally got all my ratings. And so when you get your ratings, you got to get your private, you got to get your commercial, then you got to get your single engine, got to get your multi-engine. Ultimately, if you're going to build hours, you got to become a flight instructor. And none of those things you can do until you're 18. You can train and you can pass all the requirements, but you physically can't get your license until you're 18 years old. And so by the time I graduated from high school, I had all my ratings out of high school, and to include flight instructor, single multi-engine instrument rating. And I had about 800 hours in a turbo commander flying around. And that's where, my grandfather and his business really not only was formative, but there was just a lot of, he gave me a lot of opportunities to move as fast as I could move. And, I like to say you can't push a rope.
Yeah.
And, so for me, it was, hey, okay, I did this. Can I do this? I did this. Can I do this? And it was like, okay. And I just figured out as I went. And another quick story about my grandfather. My dad had, the summer before college, my dad had lined me up with Baker Rock and got me a flagging job. And that paid really good money. Even at that time, it paid like $20 an hour. And this is 1984. And I didn't have enough money to finish my instrument rating and one other rating. I forget what it was. And maybe it was my flight instructor rating. And so my plan was to work at Baker Rock, make some more money, and go to college. And my grandfather came to me, and he goes, what do you want to do with your life? You want to fly airplanes or dig ditches? And I said, no, I want to fly airplanes. He goes, well, why aren't you finishing up your ratings? And I said, well, I'd figured out I needed about $1,500 that I didn't have. And my dad through Hustle Tractor made other airplanes available for me to fly. I mean, the whole family was pulling on the oar.
Right.
But still, money was a thing.
Yeah.
And my grandfather wrote me out a check for $1,500, and I went out and in 2 months finished up all my ratings. And so what that did for me was now it allowed me to become a flight instructor and make money flying.
Right.
And I was also a corporate pilot flying Turbo Commander around. So it is really kind of the last piece that allowed me to actually, start making aviation a career where I could make some money.
Right. And this is all towards your goal of...
My goal was to be the youngest airline pilot in the history of airline pilots. And you couldn't be an airline pilot unless you had your ATP, Airline Transport Pilot rating. And you can't get your ATP until you're 21. But again, you can get all your requirements done. And so, and at the time, it's changed a little bit today, but at the time it was you needed to have 1,500 hours, so much multi-engine time. You had to have this breakout of different amount of experience and time. You had to pass a written exam, and then you had to take a flight exam. And you can't take the flight exam until you have all these other requirements done. And so the point is I couldn't be an airline pilot until I was 21, but I could do all these other things
Right.
until I was 21.
Kind of like a mimicking of like how you got 3 months before your birthday, you worked with great grandpa.
Yeah. And, another quick story, I got all the requirements done, all the writtens done and everything, and I was still 20 years old, and then convinced the FAA to give me a check ride in a Turbo Commander and passed it. So the only thing I didn't have is I wasn't 21 years old. And at the time, the FAA was more personable. And I knew a lot of the FAA people over there, and so did my grandfather and my uncle. And so I took my check ride, I passed, and they gave me a piece of paper, and it said, on your 21st birthday, present this paper, and we'll give you your ATP. And that's exactly how that happened.
It's awesome. It seems like there's a repeating pattern here. You're always a little bit ahead of the curve. Like you're never the one who's like trying to catch up. You're the one who's trying to get everyone else to, all right, let's move on to the next step.
Yeah, well, in the beginning, it's very easy to define what those steps are. There's regulations, there's rules, there's requirements, and so you have to figure out what those are and then go make it happen. And so I wanted, by the time I reached that point, I definitely, again, wanted to be an airline pilot, and so I would just knock off whatever I needed to do,
right?
The minute I could do it.
But then you stepped off the path somewhere. When did you make that decision to go from, all right, these are the steps to become the youngest airline pilot to, oh, now I'm a founder of my own little company?
So I'm in college and I'm a corporate pilot, flying people around, getting paid by the day. I spent one summer after I graduated from high school being a flight instructor for Hillsborough Aviation. And another quick story, I got all my ratings and I went to my granddad and I said, okay. And I thought he was going to make me, I don't know, a full-time pilot flying Aero Commanders. And he told me, no, you don't have enough time to get insured. You need to go build some more time. So you need to go flight instruct. So I'm like, all right.
Okay.
So I went next door to Hillsborough Aviation and they gave me a flight instructor job. And so I started flight instructing, and then at the time there was a restaurant on the field called Blue Max, and they would give a free flight to anybody that bought a steak or a lobster dinner. So I would sit around waiting for someone to buy a steak or a lobster, and then give them a 15-minute little sightseeing tour around Hillsborough Airport, and all that was to build time. And But again, once I was in college, I was flying, the turbo commanders primarily, and and between school and flying, that kept me, very, very busy. So busy that I transferred colleges 4 times in 4 years to follow my flying career. But one year, a guy called me. His name was Tom Blazing, and he had this company flying for the Alaska Fire Service in Alaska, flying Shrike Commanders, and that's what I got my multi-engine ratings in. I had most experience in Aero Commanders. Very, very, very comfortable in Aero Commanders. And anyway, he called me and he asked me if I wanted to fly for him this summer. And it's a 4-month commitment, and he's going to pay me $4,000 a month and all my expenses. There's nothing to spend money on in Alaska. You're out in remote Alaska, Galena and Fairbanks to be exact. And so the point is, you could, $4,000 was a lot of money, and you could save up a lot of money in 4 months and fly a lot. And again,
Right.
the flying a lot was still important. And so I turned him down because I was flying, by then I was flying the jet and turbo commander. But I hooked him up with a friend of mine, Scott Easton. And so Scott took the job, went up there for the summer. He came back. We were sitting down at a restaurant, and he was telling me about the summer. And he goes, "Oh man, it was great." He goes, "You fly a lot. It's really fun." He goes, "The force or the Alaska Fire Service girls are hot." He just couldn't say.
Right. He was hyping it up, and
He was
"Shit."
hyping it up. And so anyway, that that stuck with me a little bit. And the next summer is when Tom called me again, and I took the job. So I spent that whole summer flying for Tom and really enjoyed it. But Tom was very unorganized, and he was a great guy. But, a lot of it fell on me, both from a maintenance perspective and a flying perspective to keep the airplane working right.
Right.
And they used to call him the Amazing Blazing. Tom Blazing was his name. He has since died in an aircraft accident, but he was a great guy to work for and just made everything really fun,
Right.
but very unorganized. And so anyway, that's where, at that point, I had decided that I didn't want to be an airline pilot anymore.
What made that decision? Because that's a big choice.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, it was because, I didn't like being a taxi cab driver. And, basically when you're an airline pilot or a corporate pilot, your job is to fly people.
Right.
And which means you leave when they want to leave, you come back when they want to come back. Your schedule is not your own. And by then I had, quite a bit of flight time, but I saw these Alaska contracts. And so then I started looking into these contracts. It was all public information on, what these contracts went for, how much they pay a day for the airplane, all those type of things.
Wait, was it you or was it Great? I thought Great Grandpa was the one who said, "Hey, this is something you should check out."
No, well, my grandfather, at some point over the last 4 years, he would get in the mail, and there was no email back then. Cell phones were just barely becoming a thing. They were very expensive. GPS didn't exist. LORAN had just come into existence. So the world was still very much analog, back in this time period that I'm talking about. And these contracts, he was just on a list to get mailed these contracts. And so he'd have a stack of these contracts sitting on his desk, and he would throw one at me and go, "Hey, bid this and get me
Right.
business." And so I'd read it over.
Yeah.
Oh, you got to have a commercial operating certificate. You got to have a 135 certificate. You got to, all these requirements that you have to have just to bid it.
Mm-hmm.
And most of which, the only thing I had was I was a pilot. And so,
Like, thanks, but can't do it.
well, I mean, I guess what it did was it opened up my eyes to other opportunities on paper. But then when I flew for Tom, this was one of these contracts, and then these stack of contracts that would come up for bid every 3 or 4 years. And So it kind of put in perspective, the things I've been reading in these contracts, and here's a guy that actually has the contracts and is doing it.
Right.
And the good thing about working for Tom, like I said, was it kind of said, oh, hey, well, my attitude was, well, this guy can do it.
How hard can it be?
Exactly. And so at that point, I flew for him again for another season. And then, so now I had a lot of time under my belt, specifically doing those contracts. And I had some contacts, with the Alaska Fire Service and the OAS, Office of Aircraft Services. And I felt like there was an opportunity for me to, bid these contracts and potentially get them. But you just don't know if you're going to get them or not.
Right.
And so I came up with two plans. I was going to bid these contracts, or I was going to go to law school. So I also studied for my LSAT. I took the LSAT. I applied to Oregon for law school. And
it's a big difference.
It's a big difference. And so
I never asked what inspired it. Like, what did you see a movie or something? Because we know zero people in law.
For me, my goal was always to make money. And so, well, lawyers make a lot of money. And, and I'd already tackled a lot of things in aviation. And it was kind of like, what opportunities are there in front of me? Because I didn't want to waste time. In my mind, I always needed to be moving forward. So if I wasn't moving forward, then that was a problem. So I always had a plan, kind of a plan A, plan B, if things didn't work out. So that, that's why that fell into that. Medical school didn't interest me because it was too long. And I don't know, I probably would have made a horrible attorney, to be honest with you. But at the end of the day, I did. I did that, and that's what was running around in my head. So basically, right after I graduated from college, I was doing these summer contracts, and then I was flying for Louisiana Pacific Corporation, and at that point, I was writing my own 135 certificate. I got lots of stories dealing with the FAA on that, and you were talking about.
Well, that was the time to what? Did any jump out at you? Like, now's the time to say those stories, especially dealing with like government stuff.
Well, okay, so like I told you, to bid these contracts, you had to have all these different requirements.
Yeah.
And one of them, the biggest one, is you got to have a 135 certificate, which is a commercial operating certificate. And there's different categories, but basically the certificate is the same as having an airline certificate. So if you're United Airlines or you're Kevin McCullough with one airplane, the basic requirements are all the same. And now, the smaller the organization, you don't need all the positions in place to make it happen. But at the end of the day, you have to meet these requirements. And you got to have operation manuals. How are you going to operate the airplane? How are you going to fly? How are you going to, what's your
jump
safety
through
program?
all these hoops.
There's all these different things that you need. And so I went out and I applied for my own 135 certificate. And so when you do that, you have to do a compliance document that says, basically gives the FAA, well, how are you going to do these things? You haven't done it yet. But we want to see, how are you going to comply with these FARs? And I wrote out this compliance document and submitted it to the FAA. And the head of the office in Hillsboro, I think his name was Lou, he reviewed my document and he said, this is one of the best compliance documents I've ever gotten. I was like, okay, great. And then meanwhile, I wasn't bidding a Forest Service contract. I was bidding an aerial photography contract.
Right.
And I had flown back to the Midwest. I bid at an auction on an airplane, an Aero Commander that had a camera mod in it, so you could do this aerial photography. And I had gone to the bank to borrow money. And
is this your first time borrowing money?
Yes.
From the bank?
Yeah.
The airplane. Scary.
The airplane was $60,000, and I needed a loan for like $40,000 or something like that. And so I literally flew back to the auction. It was a live auction, bid on it, got in the airplane, and flew back across the United States. Meanwhile, I had bid on this aerial photography contract, and I got that. And you didn't need a 135 certificate to do an aerial photography contract. It's not the same thing. So you're getting paid to do photography versus you're getting paid to fly passengers
Right.
or cargo.
Interesting.
So it falls in under a different set of rules. And so I bought this airplane, and I had this contract. And
Took out this big loan, first time
took out
taking out
this
a loan.
and I'm stepping out, and it was like a week later, I got this letter saying, "Yeah, the contract's been canceled."
Fuck.
And wow,
Yeah.
well, that's bad.
Not good.
It's not what I was planning. And
How did that feel, I guess? Like, what were the emotions that kind of,
well, very
went through?
disappointing, obviously, and a little scary.
Yeah,
because but
what's
frankly,
going
up
through
to
your
that
head?
point, what's going through my head is I'm a young man.
Yeah.
I got nothing to lose. That's what my
Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
I'm a young man. I got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And, the only way you can make anything happen is to do it.
Right.
I mean, so, and
But now you're sitting on this plane that's not making any money.
yeah, and I had borrowed money on it, but I knew that, spending, borrowing 40,000 to buy an asset versus that has value, meaning it's not valuable. And spending money on electric bills or consumables that are gone the minute that you pay for them and consume them are two different things. So again, I told you I was a saver. And so whenever I my whole life, whenever I borrowed money, it's only been to buy capital assets that are going to make money.
Right.
And so it wasn't to finance operations, or it wasn't to, go buy a car because I liked it, or anything like that. And so anyway, I bought this aircraft, I got this contract, I got the contract canceled. And this actually leads into, one of my things that,
Okay.
I like to tell people, but I'm like, holy, well, that's not great. So then I literally turned around and I put the airplane for sale. And, my grandfather was in the aircraft sales business. Everybody knew who Swede Ralston was. So, and everybody knew he was an Aero Commander guy. And so ultimately I had a good, not only avenue, but idea of, how to get this thing sold. And I think it was 2 weeks later, I sold the airplane for $10,000 more than I had bought it for. And my grandfather told me, he goes, okay. He goes, you went out, you found an airplane, you bid a contract got canceled, you sold the airplane, and you made $10,000. He goes, good deal, right? And I said, yeah, 10,000 profit.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, especially, this is 1989 probably. And he goes, well, here's the lesson. He goes, it doesn't take any more life's energy to do bigger deals, more zeros.
Right.
He goes, whether you're doing a $100,000 deal or you're doing $1 million deal or you're doing a $10 million deal, the amount of energy it takes to do those deals is exactly the same. He goes, but the risk and reward is much better.
Right.
Worse if you do a bad deal, but better if you do a good deal. But the lesson was the life energy one where okay, if your job in business is to get into more zeros.
Right.
Because the amount of energy it takes to do it is exactly the same.
Kind of like along your lines of everyone's got 24 hours in a day. Everyone can put in only a certain amount of work.
Yes.
And the trick is to just make it more valuable.
Make it more valuable. But as a young person, it takes time, right? You don't just graduate from college or whatever you're doing and you're doing $1 billion deal. It's just not happening. Or a $100 million deal, So it takes time. And so ultimately, and that's where grit comes in and, all those different things. But but it was a lesson that I've obviously always remembered. And okay, so that happens. And then I got offered a job to fly for Louisiana Pacific Corporation, flying Gulfstreams and Citation 3s around. So while I was flying for them, I was writing my certificate and doing it. Literally, I'd bring this Apple computer with me that, they didn't really have laptops back then.
Yeah.
I'd fly it on the airplane and I'd be writing my 135 manual. And so after I kind of got that done, I resubmitted my compliance document to the FAA, the one that, Lou had told me was so good.
Yeah.
Now it's a year later, though, okay? Because once I found out I didn't get that one contract, I told Lou, hey, I don't want to move any farther on this process, but I do want to reactivate it. And I told him what I was planning on doing with these fire contracts. And he was like, great, no problem. So now it's a year later, and finishing up my 135, and I'm doing all these things, and I resubmitted my compliance document to the FAA, literally the same document that I had submitted a year before, but I had a new they're called POI, Principal Operation Inspector, that was assigned to me. His name was Steve. Can't remember his last name right now.
Steve.
But anyway, at this time I'm like, I don't know, 23 years old or, something like that. And Steve didn't not like me, but he just thought I was way too young. And I mean, literally just way too young. And so anyway, I submit this compliance document, and like 2 weeks later, I get a letter in the mail saying that they're denying my request for a 135. And it's a very poor compliance document. And clearly, by the way it was written and submitted, I didn't know what I was doing. It didn't mean I could never have one, but I just needed a little more experience and background before I can reapply.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, this is a requirement. I can't bid these contracts without, getting my own 135. And so I'm getting a hard stop on this one. But I had this letter from what was his boss now, telling me what a great compliance document this was a year before.
Yeah.
And now I got a letter from him saying it's the worst compliance document he's ever seen. So I called over to Steve and I asked to have a meeting. And so I don't know, 3 days later we had a meeting, and I sat down with Steve, who's, the POI, that's going to be my POI. And I said, Steve, I'm here just to make sure that I'm not reading this wrong. He goes, I go, I submitted this compliance document to you, and this is the letter I got, and evidently this is the worst compliance document I've ever seen, and I have a lot of deficiencies, but I'm encouraged to in the future apply again, but when I have more experience. He goes, no, yeah, Kevin. He goes, you're a great guy. He goes, I've heard great things about you and everything. He goes, but you're just not ready yet. So I just, and I'll do, I guess his conscience is, I just can't allow you to move forward in this process. And I said, okay. I said, so I understand your position. I said, but this is my position. And I go, this letter tells me it's the worst compliance document that you've ever seen. But I have another letter from a year before from your boss, Lou, that said it's the best compliance document he's ever seen. I said, now, as an individual, what am I to think? I said, so what I think is, this is your problem, not mine. I said, and this
is the guy who's technically like...
It's going to be my boss
yeah.
over my 135. But his boss told me it was the best compliance document. I said, I would like you to meet with Lou and figure out where the problem is here, because I don't think it's me. I think it's you guys. And you guys need to get on the same page.
Wow.
So 2 days later, I get a phone call from Steve, and he says, Mr. McCullough, this is Steve. He goes, I want you to know that we were accepting your compliance document, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get you through this process as quickly as possible.
Wow.
So complete attitude
Yeah.
change, obviously. And I think a lot of that was I wasn't pounding my fists or anything. I just with facts and figures
Yeah.
and some talking, just telling them, hey, you can't stop me in this, and nor should you. And so to Steve's credit, from that day on, he did do everything he could do to help me get through this process. And so then the minute I had the 135, but I couldn't get my 135 until I had an airplane I could put on the certificate. I couldn't bid the contract without having a 135 certificate, and I couldn't buy an airplane until I had a loan from the bank, but I couldn't get a loan from the bank unless I had a contract.
Right. So it was a catch-22.
So I had, well, I call it the chicken or egg. I had a big chicken or egg problem. So again, like most of my career in the very beginning, I teed everything up as far as I could go with the limitations that I had at
Right.
the time. So I wrote my 135.
You're ahead of the curve again.
I'm ahead of the curve. And I got the FAA to agree. The minute that I bought the airplane, they'd do a inspection, and assuming the airplane was okay, then they would stamp my 135. Okay. I got the bank to agree that if I got a contract, they would loan me the money. And I knew that it was a low bidder contract. So if you were qualified, then whoever the low bidder was on the contract was going to be the winner. It didn't have discretion. The
Right.
contract officer didn't have discretion. Just
It
give
was
it
black and white.
pretty black and white. And it had always been that way. And now remember, I had a good reputation with the OAS by that point because I had flown the contracts. The people that actually used it, the different, Galena Zone and Alaska Fire Service, the head of the Alaska Fire Service, I knew everybody really well and had a good relationship with them. And so, but as a pilot. And so, and meanwhile, I'm flying for Louisiana Pacific Corporation. I'm doing all this 135 stuff. I found the airplane that I wanted. And so it takes 2 weeks for the government to verify you have all the proper documentation in place for them to give an award. So basically, I got a 2-week window between submitting my bid and being the low bidder and when they're going to actually stamp my contract and say, you officially have it. So I got the 135 teed up, got the bank teed up, I bid the contract, I was the low bidder. So then I called the bank and I said, I got the contract. Technically, that probably wasn't accurate because you don't got it until you have it stamped. But I was the low bidder. And so Mike Hart was the president of Union Bank at the time, and he was a good friend of my father's and my grandfather and knew me and who'd provide me the original loan for the first contract that I did.
Right.
So he said, okay. He wired the money. Then I flew back literally the next day and bought the airplane and then flew back across the United States. It took me 2 days. I think the airplane was in Texas. And then the FAA met me on the weekend to inspect the airplane. And by Monday, I had my 135 certificate.
So you got out of it.
So the bank financed it. The FAA, again, I never really wanted to talk bad about Steve other than the beginning because he was very, very helpful in the beginning. And I got my 135 certificate. So then I submitted all that information up to the Office for Aircraft Services because you had to send it in after the bid, and then they stamped my contract.
All right.
And then I was in business.
Good to go.
So I didn't go to law school, and I started.
up
That's what
Horizons.
really started Horizons Unlimited. So it was me, an airplane, a contract. I was the chief bottle washer. I was the unofficial mechanic. I was the only pilot.
A team of one.
I was a team of one. And technically under the contract, you had to have a backup pilot. But I got the guy running Galena Zone, who was the actual user under the Alaska Fire Service, to agree that I didn't need that. And so that first season, it was just me and an airplane.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
And so this is the Horizon Unlimited Air, very first contract, all up and going now. And
Yes.
okay, good. This is a good story. This is going well. So we're now halfway through. So then let's skip ahead to your, I'll let you give me the summary, but I want to skip ahead to going into Aero Air.
Okay.
And like talking with great grandpa, talking with Jack and all that. But give me the summary building up to when you decided to go into Aero Air.
Okay, so so these contracts that I talked about, I started those. The first year I flew with my own contract was 1990, just to give a timeline to this thing. And so from 1990, I started building Horizon. So that next year I bid another contract, fire contract in Alaska, and I got it. So I had to buy another airplane. Then I had to hire 2 pilots and a mechanic, and these were 5-year contracts. So it created some stability. As long as you performed, you were going to get paid, and you had the business. And I based all my finances on those 2 contracts. And then I got an opportunity to bid a Pony Express contract. And at the time, there was a business flying bank checks and film every day, Monday through Friday, on these different routes around Oregon. So I had a coastal route, I had a mid-Oregon route, and I had an eastern Oregon route. And so then I hired more pilots and more mechanics and bought more airplanes. And I was making money this whole time around. So part of it was the bank always wanted me the money to buy the airplanes, but I always had the money for operations. So again, back to my capability and philosophy was I'd buy for capital assets, but I had to have enough money to operate, at least for a period of time.
Right.
I also, since I was young, to say risk management, good operations are your risk management, but I wanted to grow this thing, and all the money's going back into the company, basically. And so my personal needs outside of, the company were not great. I lived in an apartment, had my car, but.
And you were always guaranteed that these contracts would pay? Like people always paid?
Well, the good thing is, I was working for the government. Okay.
Yeah.
So not really worried about getting paid by the government. Pony Express at the time was a big company. And, as long as you performed, there wasn't a huge risk. It wasn't like I was, I'm going to charge you for this flight. And, do you have money? Do you not have money?
Yeah.
For me, that didn't exist. I was working for, larger, more institutional type payers, if you will. And they were contracts. So this wasn't, going to fly tomorrow and I don't know if I'm going to fly again. Pony Express was a 3-year contract that ran every day, Monday through Friday. And so, and I got lots of stories on, how I got set up for that. But at the end of the day, I was building up Horizons Unlimited. And in 1998, I wanted to get bigger, and I needed bigger facilities. I needed, bigger capability. I just wanted to get bigger. And so Aero Air was my grandfather's company, and him and a guy named Dan Vollum owned it. And my uncle worked in that business. And again, Aero Air was, part of, that side of that's Swede. My grandfather was my mom, Dana's dad. And so very, very close with my grandfather. I'm really close with my whole family, my father, my mother, my grandfather. But I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, during these years. And I knew that Aero Air was struggling financially. And I never wanted to, I didn't want to be in his business, where I'm just a grandson working for Swede Ralston. Yeah. I wanted to own it.
Right.
And again, his business partner, was a great guy. Dan Volm was his name, is his name. And he was a great guy. And I think really loved my grandfather, but Aero Air was struggling financially.
Did you always want to get into AeroAir, or was it
No.
kind of like I wanted to be a part of, I was doing my own Horizon Unlimited?
Yeah, I didn't ever think about being part of Aero Air on the business side. I flew as a pilot for Aero Air and as a contract pilot, but never thought about being in Aero Air, at the business side. But now I'm developing my business mind, obviously, from the time I started and got the idea on what I wanted to do, and I started Horizon and growing that. Well, I was much more knowledgeable, 9 years later,
Right.
on what the good and the bad and mistakes made and all those type of things. And so I wanted to grow, and I thought, and since Aero was struggling financially, I had a pretty good idea that Dan would want to sell. And my grandfather was 80 at the time, so I was pretty sure he'd want to sell, and especially since it had been losing money for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so, but if I was going to buy Aero Air and merge Horizons with Aero, I needed a business partner. And so I went to Jack Erickson, who was a family friend, very good friends with my grandfather, my father, my mother. Jack and I have the same birthday. He was there the day I was born in the hospital. I flew for him when I was 19 years old for a summer, which is a whole nother set of stories. And
I didn't know that.
So I knew Jack, but Jack, he owned Erickson Air Crane, and they were in the timber
Helicopter.
logging business
Yeah.
with sky cranes. He owned the type certificate. He had grown. He was a very, very well-known worldwide operator in the sky crane, and eventually owned the sky crane type certificate and all those type of things.
And Sky Crane they're huge helicopters that basically go into foresting areas and take up logs, right?
Well, until Jack Erickson existed, there was no helicopter logging. He pioneered helicopter logging. He's the grandfather of helicopter logging, and he grew up in a timber family. Then they logged and they had mills, and that's how they made money. And it was Jack's idea to actually log with helicopters, and specifically the sky crane helicopter. And so his dad didn't think it was a good idea, but he thought it was a good idea, and he started that side of the company and pioneered it. And so
how did like grandma and grandpa know Jack?
So the Erickson family, Jack and his dad Axel, bought over the years about 18 Aero Commanders from my grandfather, because Aero Air was basically a sales and service center for the Aero Commander. And so they built that relationship over 20 years of buying airplanes from my grandfather. And they did a lot of, they'd fly in Canada together. Jack was a pretty young person when his dad bought the first Aero Commander. And so he spent a lot of time with Swede and over the years, and got to know my dad through, that relationship. My dad was in the heavy equipment business. They bought equipment from my dad, Erickson, the timber side. And so it was just one of those relationships that, as a child growing up, everybody knew who Jack Erickson was.
Right.
And in the industry, everybody knew in the helicopter, especially the timber, everybody knew who Jack Erickson was. So he was and is a little bit of a rock star, on that side of the business. And he's also a living legend. There's a Aviation Living Legend Society that started down in L.A., and they have a big banquet every year, and you got to be alive to be part of the organization. But he's been inducted, so he's a living legend. I like teasing him about that. He doesn't look for fame or
He's kind of like you in the way that he doesn't seek out. Although you did say,
Erickson, he put his name on the side of it, and with Erickson Aero Tanker. But the point is, but Jack's, just a great individual, and he's an operator. He likes making money, and especially with aviation. And so I wanted to buy Aero Air, but I needed a business partner because I didn't, up to that point, most of my cash was tied up, or most of my assets were tied up in aircraft.
Right.
And I had a little bit of a bank account, but I didn't have the financial wherewithal for the bank to loan me money for the purchase of Aero Air at the time, because Aero Air had been losing money. And so I needed capital, and I needed a partner. And so I approached Jack and just called him and said, hey, I got an idea that I want to talk to you about. Will you meet me for lunch? So we met at Honey Baked Ham, and I told him I wanted to buy Aero Air, but I needed a partner, and I wanted him to be the partner. And he was the guy that was going to have to come up with most of the money.
Right.
And so anyway.
Well, I guess I have a question. What? Aero Air was losing money, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted to buy a sinking ship, basically.
Yeah.
How did you know you could turn the ship around?
Well, I'll answer that question after I tell this story.
Okay.
And so I approached Jack and told him what I told him. And he looks at me and he goes, I got two questions for you. He goes, why the hell would I buy Aero Air? That's a loser. And if I did, why would I partner with you? And he said it very kind of like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But
how old are you at this?
I was 30.
30.
And 29 or 30. Yeah. 30. 30 or 31. 30 or 31. So anyway, but Jack always, and I knew this subconsciously, he's just challenging you, right? Like,
right.
Hey, on the surface, kind of to your point on the, this doesn't seem like something that I should do.
Right.
And anyway, so I said, well, that's why we're having lunch. So I walked him through what I thought. And at the end of lunch, he goes, okay, I'll partner with you. Shall we go talk to Grandpa? And I think it was the next day or maybe the same day. And we met with Swede, and he said, Kevin wants to buy Aero Air. I'm going to partner with him. Do you want to sell? Yep. Okay. Next day we met with Dan. Hey, Kevin wants to buy the company. You want to sell it? Yep. Okay. And 6 months later, we own the company. And to answer your question on whether I could turn it around or not, I didn't know. I didn't even know. Because I was there so much, I kind of knew where the problems were. But I'd never seen a set of financials other than what my grandfather would show me. But I knew what they had going on. I knew what they had for infrastructure. They didn't own any airplanes. They were a maintenance shop. They would buy and sell airplanes. They had a parts department. They had a fuel operation. And my feeling at the time was that once I got in there, I could at least right the ship. And remember, I was making money with my operations. And so I'm merging the two. And ultimately, I wanted to be a aircraft operator.
Right.
Not a FBO or a sales organization. But, but all those things you need to operate. You need fueling, you need maintenance, you need a 135 certificate, 10 or more, and these are all things that Aero Air had, and it would take in a building, 100, at the time it was 90,000 square feet, undercover. They had, Nike was a client, and so ultimately I felt like I could turn it around. But then the question is, what are you going to do with it, And in 6 months, literally in 6 months, I turned it around. Aero Air made $150,000, and we bought it in June, so the end of the year was December, and we netted out, when everything was said and done, we netted out $150,000, and then my CPA told me, okay, you made $150,000, but you owe $150,000 in taxes. And I said, you're telling me I made $150,000 and I owe $150,000. You must be the worst CPA in the history of CPAs. I go, I had to make more. How do I have to pay 100% of my profits in tax? Well, it's the difference between depreciation schedules and GAAP versus tax and all these terms that I know very, very well now. I didn't understand then. What I did understand was I needed to bring more money in than I was spending. And that's how I approached it. So I lined up headcount and salaries and people. And I would say of the management team that I inherited when I bought the company, within a year, 85% of them had quit, which gave me the opportunity very quickly to replace these with new people.
Right. How do you find, because I quit or they quit, like why did they quit, first of all? And then how did you find good people? Like, how do you know what a good person is versus, like.
Well, it depends what side of the company we're talking about here, right? In a bigger company, and at this point, Aero Air had, I think, 45 employees. And, you had an accounting department and you had no HR department. IT department didn't exist. But you had maintenance, you had to have oversight. It had a 10 more 135, so you had high FAA, a high FAA organization that you had to abide by in the 135. So you have to have a director of operations, you got to have a chief pilot, you got to have a director of maintenance. And then everybody that works on an airplane has to be approved under it had a category 4 repair station certificate, which is kind of like a 135 certificate for maintenance. So there's a bunch of technical requirements that are required but I knew this part of the business really well. And I knew people in the business. And so ultimately, Jack's company, Erickson Group, they're the ones that set up the accounting side.
Okay, so Jack's accountants basically helped you out.
Well, the people on his Erickson Group, which is really a family office, they set up the proper financial accounting and controls from the very beginning. Because remember, Jack put in most of the money.
Right.
And so, he knew I needed good information. And plus, he wanted good information, to see what was going on. And so, KPMG came in, Arthur Anderson, then KPMG. We had full audit of the company and what we bought and what we didn't buy. They set up the original set of financials. But I have a degree in finance, and over time I had an idea of what I wanted to see and how I wanted to see it. I didn't know what GAAP meant at the time, which is generally accepted accounting principles, but I did know dollars and cents, and I knew I had a very good idea very quickly on how I wanted to see the information presented.
Right. But you went through 85%, like 85% of the managers who were there left. And then
the accounting team left right away. We fired them. We brought in a whole new accounting team from the very beginning.
So you had a good sense of people then, of good people versus.
And the way people quit, it gave me a month or two to find a replacement for each one of those individuals. And what caused those people to quit was after owning the company for about a month and I started cleaning it up, I came in and I told the management team, listen, if we can't make $1 million a year here at Aero Air, I'm going to shut this thing down. So I did have lines in the sand, for myself that, if I can't get this done, then I'm going to shut that down. Or if I can't get this done, I'm going to shut this down.
Well, who do you decide to trust?
Well, that's what you figure out over time.
Yeah.
And so when people quit, it makes it pretty easy.
Yeah.
They quit. And so then you bring in, so for example, the chief pilot quit. And I brought in my good friend Greg Clausen to be the chief pilot. The director of operations quit. And I brought in Jeff Tobolsky, who I had known from the Aero Air days. And I trusted him to be a good guy. The director of maintenance quit after 6 months. And so then I promoted someone off the floor that I had gotten to know really well. And he had a military background. He was super, super good guy, very smart, wanted to do the job. And he just had the right character. And he certainly had the technical expertise to do the job. People would argue his people skills weren't that great, but I could trust him. And he was an Aero Air guy. And I just felt like he would do a very good job. And so I put him into place as the director of maintenance for the repair station and for the 135 certificate. The FBO, the fuel manager didn't quit, but after a couple of years, I replaced him because he wasn't doing the job that I needed him to do. And so it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time.
How has your style changed over that time then? Like your leadership style, has it changed? Or were you always kind of the same?
No, I don't think my leadership style has changed at all. I expect people to perform, certainly, and it's important to determine if things aren't going the way you want it to go, is it that person's fault or is there another issue?
Yeah.
Is it the person's issue or is it a market conditions, or is someone else causing this, or maybe they have a certain behavior that is not allowing things to happen the way they should, and I need to make sure that behavior gets modified. But at the core, it comes down to, are they a good person? Are they smart? And do they know what they're doing, or can they be taught? And then you have the loyalty factor. You people have to be personally invested in the company at Aero Air, which means, you can't feel like a pawn, but you also can't make yourself a pawn. And if it's always someone else's problem, then I got a problem.
Right.
And from a management perspective, and I've told this to many, many people, I want to be able, when we have an issue, I want to be able to point a finger at whose problem it is, or whose responsibility it is. And I want that to be very clear to that person.
Right.
And so if I got someone rashed an airplane in Alaska, rash is when you bump it against another airplane or a hangar, it needs to be very clear who owns that.
Right. It can't be just a loop of pointing fingers.
Yeah, that's this guy's fault, and that guy's fault. That's that guy's responsibility. No, things need to be very clear, and people need to know what they're doing. So then the question is, how do you react, and how do they react when a mistake is made? It's not, I don't fly off the handle when people make mistakes, but it depends on the motivation of that mistake. If it was personal, that's bad, meaning an attitude problem.
Yeah.
If it was, shit happens, well, why did shit happen? I mean, is your attitude, that just, like, here's a great example of what I'm talking about. We, for a while, had a real problem with rashing of airplanes at Aero Air, which means line service moving airplanes and bumping them into other airplanes.
Yeah.
So I sat down with the FBO manager, and I said, hey, what the heck? What's going on here? This is crazy, ridiculous. It affects insurance rates. It affects customer service. You rash your airplane, they don't have any confidence in you. Also, you got to get their airplane fixed. I mean, it's just a whole host of issues that doesn't need to happen. And we had like, in 2 months, we had like 3. It was like this crazy thing.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with the manager, who, to my finger pointing, very clear, he knew this was his, maybe he didn't rash it, but his people, his team.
Right.
Okay, Alan, why did this happen? Well, Kevin, we were so busy around here, and we're moving airplanes all the time. When you move airplanes as much as we do, we're undoubtedly going to rash an airplane from time to time. That was he believed it. I mean, that was he's the manager now. That's his answer to me. And it was totally rational from his perspective. Hey, look at all these movements we're doing. We're moving things all the time. You know, guys are trying to get things done. They're working hard, and yeah, they're going to bump into each other from time to time. And I said, so I paused and I said, Alan, I go, let me give you an example of another busy department, the flight department. We fly a lot. I mean, a lot. Airplanes are going up in the air. They're coming back down all over the place all the time. Now, if I came to you as a pilot and I landed with the gear up, I go, and my answer was, you know what? I fly so much that there's going to be some time I forget my gear. That's just the way it is. And today was the day. And I'm not going to do it again, but, you know, basically not my fault.
Right.
What would you think? Is that acceptable?
No, it's
Or
pretty bad.
say, in a course of a career, I'm just going to crash at some point. I'm just going to.
Yeah.
It's going to
Matter
happen.
of when.
Just a matter of when. And I said, Alan, there's no excuse for rashing an airplane. People need to use best practices. You got to have a wing walker. The guy driving the tug is the captain, and he's got to not hit anything ever. But as your attitude is, that's acceptable, evidently, then my problem's with you. Because I don't think the guy moving the tug thought it was acceptable that he wrecked it.
Right.
Now, he might have come up with some excuses in his head, but at the end of the day, the problem seems to be the management, not the training. So, if we rush any more airplanes in the next year, I'm firing you. Period. So, if there's a rash here, I'm going to fire you because I need to get someone in here that can make sure we're not rashing airplane. We didn't rash an airplane for 3 more years.
So it wasn't
It wasn't inevitable, and it's just ridiculous to begin with. So again, it's a small example, but I use it as in our business. We're a service business. It all comes down to people.
right. Well, speaking of people, little segue here.
Yeah.
You mentioned when you first came to Jack, you said you need a business partner.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me a story yesterday where that shifted at some point. Could you tell me more about that?
Story. Yeah. So I think what you're talking about is when he offered to
Yeah.
sell me the company. So we'd probably owned the company for, I'm going to guess, 10 years, and we hadn't started a tanker yet. That wasn't an idea on the table. And my grandfather had died. And so Jack came to me kind of soon after, within 6 months, and said, hey, I just want you to know I've really enjoyed being your partner, but if you want to own this company 100%, I'll make you a great deal on it. He didn't give me a number. He just said, I'll make you a great deal on it and give you financing, meaning it'd be a buyout of some type, and you can own it 100%. Just want to make you that offer. And it wasn't like he wanted out. He just thought, I think my impression was, hey, Kevin, he might want to own 100% of this thing. And I'd be, in any investment Jack makes, he obviously wanted to make money at, as well as me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at the time he viewed it as a gesture of, maybe now's the time for Kevin just to have this 100%. And, it was a great partnership and we'll end it on a good note. And so I thought about it for a couple of days, and I came back to him and I said, we've been great partners, and I think I would prefer to just make it bigger and keep you as a partner. And I didn't want to leverage the company, meaning whatever good deal would have been, it still would have been in the millions, and I would have had to have probably borrowed that money and levered up the company. And the company could have done it at that point, but it couldn't. It would limit growth potential if something were to change, or if there's an opportunity, it might limit my ability to borrow for capital assets. It all depended. But at the end of the day, from my perspective, it was just this really good partnership. And if I wanted to make more money, just needed to make it bigger. And so that's what I told him. And I think he was, when to say happy, he was like, all right, good.
Yeah.
And
that
so
seems like a shift I brought Jack on for because I needed to now Jack's like my partner, right?
Yeah.
I'm working with him.
Yeah. And there are huge benefits to a good partner, way beyond money.
Yeah.
And
I'd say he's more of a mentor than.
Oh, for sure, he's a mentor. But, beyond that, he's a good thinker. And
how so?
There's one thing that Jack would agree with, and I think his family would agree with this. Jack and I think exactly alike.
Yeah.
Exactly alike. And he can be a little gruff, and I think people would say rough around the edges, but he has a very unique perspective on a lot of things in a positive way. And there's never been a communication gap between Jack and I. Now, him as a mentor and as a partner, it doesn't mean we agree on everything all the time, but it does mean we understand each other. And I understand what Jack is trying to tell me instantly.
Right.
I might not agree with his take. And the other good thing about our partnership is it was agreed at the very beginning that there's only one cook in the kitchen, and I'm the cook. So as it relates to Aero Air, the buck stops with me. Every decision, anything we do, and Jack will never override me in what I want to do. Now, I will always talk to Jack about, if it's a new idea or something that I'm doing, I always talk to him about him first, so I'm not surprising him.
What are some good Jack chunks of wisdom that he's given you before?
Well, I told you the bootlicker one.
Yeah, that's a good one. But there's been so many, though. There's more than that.
Yeah, one of them is you can't trust anybody 100%. Anybody. Him or me or anybody working for you, can't trust them 100%. Now, that sounds negative to begin with, but it's really not. What he's saying is just always keep your eyes open and be aware of people and what's going on around you, and don't necessarily trust everything that they tell you. And I'll give you an analogy to that. So early on when we had the company, I was having a lot of problems in the maintenance shop, and I'd be told one thing, and then I'd find out later, no, it was exactly opposite, or no, that guy didn't get communicated with, or no, we didn't do this, or we did do this, or whatever it was. And I'd always find it out when I couldn't do anything about it. And the guy that was running the shop at the time, he was a good guy. And I'm sure from his perspective, he was always telling the truth, but he wasn't. He just wasn't.
Right.
And I can't do anything about it unless I have good information and the right thing. And so I ended up firing him, and I hired my dad, your grandpa, to run the shop. And he was 60 something at the time. Never, he was in the heavy equipment business, never in the aviation business. So he was a pilot, but he's a good people person, and I could trust my dad.
Yeah.
And he goes, why the hell would you want me to come in here and do this job? And I said, well, you'll be close to your house. You're going to make more money than you're currently making, and I can trust you.
Yeah.
I said, I don't need you to know how to do these things. I know. I need you to just tell me what's going on so we can make the right decisions. And so he took the job, and that totally changed everything in the shop. So that's a segue to what Jack said. You can't trust anybody 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. All pilots are liars.
That's another Jackism.
That's another Jackism. And that also falls under when something goes wrong, there'll be 4 different versions of the story until you get to the bottom of it. And that has played over many, many, many times over the years. And again, they're not liars. They just remember it different. And, he is real big on being actively involved with every aspect of the company, not necessarily micromanaging people, but actively aware of what's going on with everything. So to this day, I stay involved on the insurance side. I am the lead on the banking side. Normally, that would be your CFO. It's me. I've moved away from being the lead with the FAA or the Forest Service, where I used to always be that, but others play that role now. Jack would probably view that as a negative. I'm not sure. But at the end of but the reason it's that way is for good reasons. But the point is, stay intimately involved in the major areas of your company, so you know what's going on. Certainly, the CFO reports to me, and I have a president that runs the company now. So I don't run day-to-day operations, but I still stay very involved in these critical areas.
Okay. Good advice. This is gonna be a two-parter here. We're gonna cover negatives first, and we're gonna go to positives.
Okay.
So, what was the biggest mistake that you've made in business? And like, was there a failure that you've had that looking back you're grateful for?
What's the biggest failure? I've never failed. Everything I do turns to gold, and I just don't want to tell you. No, like in the beginning,
think about it.
It's interesting because I think, people from the outside, when you look at failures, right? To me, it's not really failures. It's you head down a road to do something, and you're always going to get obstacles, always. Whether it's in school, or it's in business, or it's something you're trying to do in business. There's always people that are going to try to make you stop, or going to shut you down, and I really heard that on the tanker side. I mean, government people, we had an FAA guy come in once, very beginning, going, I'm going to be running this show, and you're going to do what I'm telling you to do. I mean, literally, he's like pounding his fist on the table. He had nothing to do with, he was with the FISDO. We're dealing at the ACO at the engineering level. That has nothing to do with him. But he, for some reason, felt it very important that we understood that he was the guy. And, I mean, we knew he wasn't the guy. And
right.
So we let him, pound his... And I think at the end of that meeting, Jack was actually there for that. He goes, well, Tom, or whatever his name was, that ain't going to happen. Just
told him
it's just not going to happen. So we're not sure. I'm not sure why you think you're going to be involved in this, but you're not. And literally, we never saw him again. But there's an example. And so failures. I mean, again, there's been a lot of challenges out there, starting at the very beginning when we bought the company. But it's how you approach it, and also how you structure things. So in the beginning, when you're young, you got nothing to lose. So go for it, right? Yeah. Be smart, but go for it. Worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to fail, and then, you're no worse off than you were before you tried, right?
What do you mean by be smart, though? That's kind of like a very broad.
Well, don't just sit there and go, I want to be a billionaire. I'm going to be a billionaire in a year. I'm using an extreme example.
Yeah.
But I think people feel like success is getting rich quick because they look at an individual and they go, man, I want to be like that guy. I got an example. I've had several people over the years at Aero Air. I have an open door policy. Young people come up, sit down and talk to me about stuff, and they say, I want to be like you. And I ask, well, who's me? What does that mean?
Yeah.
I know what it means, but I don't think you do. Well, you fly around in a jet and you got a company and you do all this cool stuff, and I want to be like that. Okay. Well, so from my perspective, I'm sitting there going, they want to jump from being a young 20-something person to me. And their expectation is, I want to do this quickly. And so my response to that person was, I said, okay, I understand that, but you're not asking me the right question. And well, what's the right question? I said, what was I doing when I was your age? It's kind of to your point on this interview. that led me to where I am here today. Because if you're not willing and smart, my smart comment about what you do, then you'll never be there.
Right.
So don't think about don't think about who I am today. If it inspires you to do something in aviation, then great, But what you should do is figure out what were the steps along the way, and then when you get that information, how do you use that in your own journey, whatever that is? Yeah, are there lessons learned from it? And so that gets down to a big thing that I think is important is if you're not a curious person all the time, in other businesses and people, then that's going to be a problem, because I'm very curious. I think you know that as my son. I walked in here today.
Yeah, you're always assessing things, thinking about how does it make money?
Yeah.
How does it lose money? How can we make it better?
And that wouldn't, I'm not planning on being in the studio business, but at the end of the day, it interests me how people approach things. And
I think that's something that you put in my mind too, is like I always look at things, and I guess a big chunk of advice that sticks with me that you used to always say is I'd come to you with some business idea. I'd be like, oh, Dad, I got this great idea of this company that I want to do, or this like product that I want to make. And he's like, oh, and your immediate response every time is, okay, sweet. How's it going to make money?
Yeah.
And that's always like the first question you ask. And that's a surprising question that not many people know to ask when they first get started with the business.
Yeah, I think it really is. They assume that if it's a good idea, it's going to make money.
Right.
But you don't make money by accident. And, in my business life, in my world, I think it's interesting because your generation grew up in a different time than me. That's an obvious statement. I guess where I'm coming from is you have all these examples of people, they became a billionaire. They came up with this idea, an app or whatever, and boom, they're a billionaire. Okay. I think there's two distinct worlds in business. Okay. One of them is the world I live in, which I'm going to call as a nut and bolt business. It's a grind business. And what I mean by that is I have to bring in more revenue than I spend. And whatever's left over is profit. I'm a private company. I'm not evaluated on the stock market. There's not a billion investors, or anything like that. And, people talk about scalability and ramp and then they talk about VC funding and round A, B, and C and all these different things. And that's clearly a real deal. But what's common in all that world is these companies don't make money. These ideas.
Right.
And my company, and since the very beginning, my mind is, well, I got to be able to generate revenue. I got to be able to generate it quickly. I can't lose money for 6 years or 10 years and stay in business.
Right.
I got to make money. And that's a different world than, I refer to it as a .com world. I don't know what you would call it, but it's just
more emotion-based world, I'd guess.
No, the point is it's real. People can make a lot of money doing it. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't understand it.
How, you cannot make a dime and be worth several billion dollars.
Yeah, or to spend all your time and energy just raising money.
Yeah.
To burn it up.
There's whole businesses built, real nut and bolt businesses.
There's whole jobs built on that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm just saying it's a world I don't understand. I've looked at taking Aero Air public before, just as a thought exercise, and learned what it would take, costs associated with it, and Aero Air would have to be a much bigger business, which, if we want to do a bunch of acquisitions and roll-ups and that type of thing, we could probably do that. But everything takes time and energy. And at the end of the day, why are you doing it?
Right.
So again, getting back to, the business side of this, I think it is important for younger people that are starting out. Well, what type of business am I getting into? Am I getting into what I call a nut and bolt business? Or am I getting into one of these businesses where it's going to be public, it's going to start out with VC funding, and then it's private equity is going to come in for a round, or there's going to be whatever, just tranche of outside investors and those type of thing. And they're just completely two different worlds. Right. And so, but regardless, you need to understand what world you're jumping into and why. So that'd be my comment on that.
Okay. Or like a bootlicker business. I guess that's a nut and bolt business, but that's a specific type of nut and bolt business.
Well, yeah. I mean, just to put some context on that, Jack, we had bought the company. It was probably, I don't know, we'd owned it for a month. I had met with all these clients and people and dealing with all these issues. And I mean, there were huge issues. There were huge issues. We were dealing with theft, and we were dealing with fraud, and we were dealing with just lots of things. But Aero Air at its core at the time, they didn't own any airplanes. We were a service, we're still a service business, but we're a service business where we're the middleman on everything. We fix an airplane, we're the middleman. We pump gas, we're the middleman. We fly an airplane. They weren't our airplanes, so we were operating it for somebody on our certificate. So everything hinged on clients that had airplanes that were wealthy or wealthier, bringing it to us to do something, fly it or fix it or fuel it.
Right.
Basically, hangar it. So you're dealing with high net worth individuals. And, personalities in that world are, can be interesting. I have learned that the wealthiest people in the world are really the nicest. And it's that barely wealthy where they're the ones with the attitudes.
The rich versus rich.
Yeah. And so I was telling Jack about all these interactions, and some of these were just ridiculous. I mean, people wanted things that just crazy. But I was telling him about all these things I was dealing with. And he, like he does, he listens. He's a good listener. And he looks at me and he goes, "This is a bootlicker business." And I'm just sitting there like, "What?" He goes, "This is a bootlicker business." He goes, "You lick boots." I'm a bootlicker. He goes, "I hate bootlicker businesses." And he walked out. I didn't see him for a month, I think. He just
gone with the wind.
See ya. Yeah. So anyway, it was an interesting day. Another interesting day that I'll share with you really quick, since we're on Jack Erickson. I was talking about the shop, and I was talking to get into big airplane maintenance. And specifically, I wanted to start doing Gulfstream maintenance because bigger airplane, more zeros.
Right.
The client had a better ability to pay because they're more expensive. And if you own an expensive airplane, usually you have the ability to pay. So, and then less hassles. You're dealing with a director of maintenance rather than the owner. He's the one. And,
a little more informed.
Yeah, and you can have a better relationship with him because he's there usually with the airplane. Anyway, all these reasons I wanted to get into the big airplane maintenance, big corporate jet maintenance business. And I was telling Jack about my idea. "Yep, I think that's a great idea." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to do something about this." And then 6 months later, we're talking, and I said, "I think we need to get in the big airplane business, maintenance business." And I'm giving the same pitch again.
Right.
And he goes, "Yeah, no, you told me that. I told you I thought it was a good idea." Okay. And I just want to talk about it. Okay. And then a year later, or now it's a year, I bring it up again. And this is an example where a mentor partner is a good thing. A good one is a good thing to have. So I bring it up again. And, after about 10 minutes, he shakes his head and he goes, "You know what?" He goes, "You're a bullshitter." Again, I know he likes me. I know, and I know. Yeah. And he goes, "You're a bullshitter." And I said, "What do you mean I'm a bullshitter?" He goes, "You're a bullshitter." He goes, I've heard this story 3 times. I told you thought it was a good idea. You think I'm going to do something? That's your job. He goes, so either do it or don't, but quit talking to me about it. He goes, you're a bullshitter. And he walks out again. But my reaction, once I got over my surprise, was, you know what? I am a bullshitter.
Yeah, he's right.
I'm not doing anything. I keep talking about stuff, but I don't put anything into action.
Right.
And then in the next week, I started putting it into action, and we got into the big airplane maintenance business for a lot of years.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So we have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
I asked my friends and my Instagram some questions. And so we have 10 minutes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 questions, 9-ish questions.
So 1 minute a question.
So 1 minute a question. A little
Okay,
rapid fire. All right. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. How do you decide when it's time to walk away from something versus pushing through it?
I would say that in business and relationships, it's the same. Now, that being said, I think once you're married, it changes things. But once you identify that either whatever you were thinking isn't real or isn't true, you should walk away. Not necessarily when you have a problem, but if the fundamental side of whatever it is, so if you're dating someone and you find out a person's a liar or a cheater or doesn't have good character, then you're done. Way before you get married. So make sure those things are in place. In business, it's kind of the same thing. If you're starting out and you think, oh, this is a good idea, but it's predicated on these 3 things happening or these things being successful, and then that's not happening, doesn't mean you get out of business. It just means you stop.
Right.
And quit the
reassess.
Quit the burn.
Look at a different angle of it.
Yeah. But you have to be moving. You have to be in motion.
Right.
For anybody to be successful, because if you're not moving down a path, whatever that path is, then you don't see the opportunities, because there's new opportunities that present themselves. I didn't buy Aero Air thinking I was going to be in the tanker business.
Right.
I didn't buy Aero Air thinking I was going to be in the med business. None of that.
We got to do another one where we talk about tanker, because we completely glossed over tanker.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a big part of
It's a big part
of you. Okay. Next question. As someone leading at your level, what matters most to you today?
Leading at my level.
I don't know what that means, but
my small level that I have. What matters to me today are the same things that have always mattered to me. That I'm growing. I'm assuming this is from the business perspective. That I have the right people in place. We're executing appropriately. And we're recognizing opportunities when they present themselves and taking advantage of it, and are positioned to do so.
All right. If you woke up tomorrow with nothing, or just $10,000 to $20,000, what business would you start?
Well, okay. The idea of starting a business should not be predicated on money. Because in my experience, capital become available if it's a decent idea. And I'll use Aero Air as an example. I didn't have the capital to buy Aero Air, and I couldn't borrow it from the bank. But I thought it was a good idea. So I partnered with Jack. We ended up doing a deal, and it happened. So my answer to that person is I would ignore the $10,000 to $30,000 because it really doesn't matter. The question is, do you have a good idea or a good area that you want to go into? And then what are the requirements, whether it's capital or otherwise, to get involved with it? And then okay, if it's capital, find a partner. If it's people or connections, then go figure that out. That would be my answer to that.
I guess if we don't have time for this, but this would be my follow-up question: is what makes a good idea? Is there
anyone in hindsight that's successful? That's the funny thing about.
Isn't that the trick though? What's a good idea and what's not a good idea?
What is the thing about losers and winners? The winners write the storybook or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that.
I guess what actually go ahead.
Well, what I wanted to say was, you know, again, I talked about those two different worlds, the app world with VC and then the nut and bolt world, so I can't speak for VC ideas, or app ideas where you got to look for lots of funding. I'd say, in my world, it starts with, it isn't, most of what I do is not new. Like firefighting isn't a new thing. People have been doing that a lot. We just do it bigger and better than others. There are times where there's opportunities for things to happen, and there's times it isn't. Like right now, it'd be very hard for someone to get the large air tanker business because there's already 4 big vendors. So now you're competing with 4 people that also have done very well and have good equipment. So it'd be very hard for a 5th player to come in with some new product because now the only thing he can compete on is price, unless somehow it's more effective.
Yeah.
So my answer to that is, good ideas on my side of the world are rooted with some connection to the real world. Right? That creates a revenue stream quickly.
Okay. What is the best advice for someone who wants to own a business one day?
Someone wants to own a business. I think my best advice to you is find what you're good at and then go do that. Not necessarily what you're passionate about. Find out what you're good at, determine if you can make money at it, and then go do it.
Go do it. Cool. All right. I have some on my phone too that I didn't get a chance to write down. 1 sec.
I wasn't 9 though.
Some were very similar to each other. Okay. What did it feel like making your first million?
Well, what did it feel like making my first million? I would say there was no emotion tied to it. You wake up one day and you made $1 million.
There was no number for you that was like, this is kind of a big deal? Or was it just kind of all a step on the journey?
It's just all on the journey. People talk about what's enough, what's enough money or that type of thing. Growing a business and making money is a fun thing to do just for the sake of doing it. And so I enjoy making money in aviation. It gives me a reason to wake up in the morning. It gives me something to engage to. I think I'm good at it. And it's fun making things happen. Now, it always has to have money tied to it because that's how the world, that's how we work in a world. So unless you have a lot of money, if you're doing something that doesn't make any money, well, then you always need money from someone else for you to do what it is that you need to do. So, when I don't even know when I made my first $1 million, what does that mean? When the company was worth $1 million, or when I had $1 million cash in my bank account, or, so for years, my wealth was tied up in the company. Now the company was pretty big and, arguably worth more than $1 million, but at the end of the day, it wasn't one I could touch.
Right.
And that's one other quick comment I want to make. People talk about investing and buying Bitcoin and, all these type of things and getting rich. You gotta have money to invest.
Right.
Right. So the point is everybody, when they're starting out, needs to go out and, get a good job and spend less than you make, or create even a small company and make money before you can ever invest. And people miss that step. The people that are in the investing business are in the business of investing other people's money.
Right.
Many times when they make some money, they invest also. But at the end of the day, there's a distinction between, a job and having a business and making money and investing. And so, yes, investing is a business, but the vast majority of the people, are investors. And by the nature of that, you got to make money to invest. So my point is everybody that's out there making money and getting paid, whether they have a business or a job, that's hard-earned capital that you pay taxes on and you stuff away into your wherever, and you're going without, you're not spending it, to invest. So do it carefully. Don't try to get rich quick, I guess
Right.
is my point.
There's no such thing as an overnight success.
Correct.
Well, we have 3 minutes left. Anything you want to say? Any ideas you had? Any
Well, let's see here.
untouched
Let's
on?
see here if I have 3 minutes.
Well, he's not here, so we could just go until we get kicked out.
Well, I'm good whenever. What did I want to pass on that? No, I think I covered everything.
Oh, you
So-
had. Well, then, let's finish this out then, because I had one last question that I wanted to
Okay.
ask.
Let's do it.
Let me see if I accidentally skipped over anyone. Okay. If you could go back before all of it, before you started, I guess to see your younger self to like when you were like 17, 18, maybe even 15, before you started flying, what would you tell him?
Have fun.
Have fun?
Meaning you're going to have a great life.
It's pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, people say, what would you do different,
Yeah.
now that in hindsight? And really, to be honest with you, there's a lot of things that we didn't talk about, other areas, opportunities that I was pursuing that didn't work out or were disappointments, like big disappointments. Some were small, some were big. But now when I look back on all those things, I thank God that I didn't get what I wanted at the time. Because if I had, it would have put me in a different path. And I love my path.
Right.
So I can't imagine really, frankly, anything working out better than it has on all fronts, family, friends, company, what I get to do, opportunities and things that I get to do and achieve. And so I've talked to your mom about this. I said, I look back going, thank God that didn't work out, or that didn't work out, or that didn't work out, because that would have put me on this different path.
Yeah.
That now I think, I don't know that I would have been satisfied or have liked that path down the road. And I love my life and, where I'm at right now. And so I wouldn't change anything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. As your son.
As your son, yeah.
That's pretty good.
I'm really
response.
glad I had you and Nicole.
Well, I'm glad I'm here.
Glad I married your mom.
Well, I think we need to do another one of these. And because, like I said, we did completely gloss over tanker. And
Right.
there's a lot of questions that I skipped over here too. Not questions asked by people, but like part of entrepreneurship and lessons.
Yeah.
But honestly, I didn't think about how I'd close this out. So I guess look at the camera there.
What,
and
there? That little one?
No, the one that's plugged in up there. Or actually, or just look
This
into
one?
that one. No, look into your camera. Okay.
I can look into that one, which is there. I can look into that one, which is there.
Just look into that one. Look at that one, the big one.
Okay.
And any final, what was it? What do you hope people picked up listening to this? Like, what do you hope was one of the biggest lessons learned? I guess we've asked this in 3 different ways already,
Yeah.
but
I
I don't know. Any final thoughts or no?
No, enjoy the journey, be curious. And what we didn't talk about, which is grit. And a comment I would like to make, I've met some people, specifically in their 20s or maybe even early 30s, and they talk about work-life balance. And if you're worried about work-life balance, then I think you need to sit back and analyze that. I said, one, an employer, if you bring up work-life balance to an employer, then you're probably not going to get the job. And if you view it as work-life balance, meaning you got a problem with work-life balance, then there's really something else going on, because when you are doing what you want to do and going after things, you don't think about work-life balance. You think about the things that I talked about. What is the next thing I have to get done, or the next step that I need to achieve? If it's about, you will get work-life balance. You just automatically, because you'll be doing what it is that you want to do. And to others, it might seem like you're, a go-getter, or you're really super working hard, but really you're just knocking, teeing them up and knocking them down. But if your attitude is, oh, I'm stressed out and I'm overworked and I need better work-life balance at 20 some years old, it's going to be very hard to achieve anything of substance, because that's the time to grind, and everything's people call it a grind. You need to grind. You need to work hard. If you're working for someone, you need to be working hard for that person and making things happen. If you're working for yourself, then it all falls on you, and you got to make that happen. So if you're ever to the point where you're thinking about work-life balance, I think you really need to reevaluate what you're doing and why.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's been the McCullough podcast. Subscribe, like, all the stuff. Say, look directly into that camera and say, click like and subscribe.
Click like and subscribe.